Welcome to Neurorevolution. The world was not designed for us, so we are creating a new one. Hear the stories of neurodivergent entrepreneurs, creatives, and changemakers. The rebel minds changing the world. Welcome to this week's episode, where I am talking with Tahlee Rouillon, who is a neurodivergent music composer and the co-founder of the Restful app, which we will get to learn about today. So welcome, Tahlee.
Hi, Jenny Lee. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me today. And I usually like to start these conversations by just asking about your personal journey. So whatever you would like to share around what was your journey to understanding yourself as a neurodivergent person.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a long one. I'm not going to lie. I think I'm 44 now and I was only just diagnosed ADHD last year. And prior to that, I just kind of felt just different. I just felt like a little bit weird, a little bit different, like I didn't really quite fit in. I was too sensitive. I was told I was sensitive, melodramatic, like a daydreamer, all of those sorts of things. And I think as a kid, I was really lost in my own world a lot. I was kind of a space cadet. And yeah, I think I also had some, fairly traumatic experiences growing up, including bullying. And so all of that really kind of like carried with me into my, young adult and adult life. And I went to therapy on and off for all different things, trying to kind of get to the bottom of like, why am I like the way that I am? And, at first it started with like depression and anxiety and an eating disorder and, kind of breadcrumbing my way to figure out, quote unquote, what was wrong with me. And because really I was trying to find a sense of peace in myself and I just wanted to feel better. And I did, therapy was really helpful over the years. And then a few years ago, I was sort of started to get exposed to the idea of being trauma informed and like what trauma is. And that's when I realized, actually, I think, I've had some, adverse childhood experiences and childhood trauma. And so I went back to therapy and I did EMDR, which was fantastic. Personally, I really loved it. It was really helpful for me. And then at the same time, I was following a lot of psychologists on social media and trauma-informed people on social media. And then this word neurodivergent kept cropping up. And so I started to learn about that. And I was like, I think that I'm neurodivergent. This kind of makes sense to me. Like I was a highly sensitive person. I, felt really different. And because I also have a strong interest in neuroscience, this was really fascinating to me. And so then I started going down the rabbit hole of, am I autistic? I still don't know. I haven't been formally diagnosed. I've been peer diagnosed. Friends who have been diagnosed autistic tell me that I am. But I also got formally diagnosed as ADHD. And so all of those things have, fall under the umbrella of neurodivergence. And so, it felt like the right identity for me.
A long journey, and I think that many of us could probably relate. I like how you said the breadcrumbs. You have these little breadcrumbs that are like leading you toward what could be like a really powerful realization. What was that like for you since it's been recent? When they like, yes, this is ADHD, and then you're going to explore things after that probably. But like, what was that like for you?
It was much more emotional than I thought it would be, actually. When my psychiatrist diagnosed me with ADHD and CPTSD, I thanked her and we got off the call and I just burst into tears. I really was quite surprised at how emotional it made me because prior to that, for a year, I had been operating with a self-diagnosis. And I was just like, I'm almost certain that I'm ADHD. I'm just going to live my life as though I do. And I'm going to try systems and tools and strategies that help ADHDers and see if it works for me. And it did. And then, so I was fairly confident going in that I was going to receive the correct diagnosis. And so it really kind of did take me by surprise at how emotional I felt of just that validation.
That makes a lot of sense. I know I shared on another episode that like for me it was relieving that to have like an answer, but it can bring up a lot of things. That it can be like a grief of looking back and seeing maybe like things we missed out on or things that it would have been so nice to have an understanding of why it was happening. Um,
Absolutely.
so that can be part of it, and like all sorts of other emotions too, of course, as we move into this like really powerful self-understanding. Um,
Yeah.
thank, thank you for sharing about that.
Oh, well, thank
And
you.
and I know it's so deeply connected with the work that you do now. And so maybe we could talk a little bit about like the music production, the composing, how like your journey into music. I know that you mentioned like since 2001 you've been composing music, and so that's a long time.
Yes, it is. It's a really long time. I've actually been a music brat my whole life.
Okay.
I think music has been my like enduring special interest.
Mm.
And I started learning the flute when I was 10 years old. Prior to that, I sang in choirs. I feel like my voice is my first instrument, and so yeah, I sang in choirs and bands. I went to university to study a Bachelor of Music. I was a jazz vocalist for a while, and then I got into music production and really like fell in love with ambient music and electronic music. And then, yeah, from there, 2001 was when I graduated uni, and I really hit a process of burnout at that point. And looking back, I can now see that it really was ADHD burnout. It was neurodivergent burnout. I hit the wall, and I also felt so lost. I really, I had been so fortunate to spend my whole, childhood and young adulthood being immersed in this topic and subject that I absolutely adored. And yet now I was like thrust into the real world and I had no idea what I was supposed to do. I didn't know how to get a job. I didn't know what kind of like music producer I wanted to be. For a little while, I thought maybe I would do games, like soundtrack for games and sound design for games. But I just was so lost. And it was just a really incredible kind of happenstance that a psychologist that I had met introduced me to this thing called binaural beats. And she said to me, I think if you could incorporate this into your music, it would be really powerful. And at the time, there were only two companies in the world that I even knew of that were doing binaural beats. And at the time, I was working for my old university, so I actually had access to this incredible library. So I was able to research it, and I ended up just falling in love with how powerful binaural beats were. But I felt like the music that was accompanying them, the companies that were doing them, it just didn't resonate with me. And I really was drawn to this idea of how can I combine, exceptional, beautiful music and binaural beats. And then that's where I came up with the term meditones, because I didn't want to just talk about binaural beats. I wanted to talk about the music as well. Also in 2001, no one knew what binaural beats were. And it was like such a weird term to try to explain to people. And yeah, so I think from there, I was so drawn to this idea of music as a tool that could soothe the nervous system, and in a lot of ways could help people get into those meditative states that I personally really struggled with, and I knew a lot of other people did too. So yeah.
I love that you're really utilizing music for that sense of relaxing the nervous system. And I know that some folks like describe music as a feeling translated into a sound. And so, could you share a moment or experience that deeply shaped how you approach creating this like emotive sonic sound landscape? What I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was probably my creative process felt really inscrutable to me for a long time. I wasn't ever really sure how I made music or how it happened. It always felt like a little bit of a fluke. And so I was always quite scared when I was younger that I was never going to be able to replicate what I had done in the past. But I had this incredible opportunity in 2014. I went to an artist retreat in Finland, and it was called Silence, Awareness, Existence. And it was a deeply meditative, really quiet retreat. And I was able to write an album that I called True North. And I think it was there that I kind of realized, I was like, how do I want people to feel when they hear this music? And I think that was the like critical moment that I went, oh, right, like this is how I write music. I start with a feeling, I start with an emotion, and then I figure out what are the sounds that make me feel that way? What are the melodies and harmonies that, you know, help to produce that feeling in my body? And then once I kind of like, I grasped that, my creative process was much, much easier.
I love that example because it shows like how I think often us as neurodivergent folks, like we kind of have to find our unique way of creating something or doing something. And I love how you
Yes.
found almost like the inverse direction, you know, like, okay, I'm not necessarily trying to produce a feeling, but I'm trying to start with a feeling and then see how that flows out. And I just love how that
Oh,
was
thank you.
like your unique way of composing music.
Yes, thank you for saying that. Yeah, it does feel like a little bit of an upside down way, but yeah, it makes sense to me. So
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think, one thing that I love about this podcast and the folks that come on here is that we're sharing about how we do things in a way that's, you know, called neuroaffirming. And that term
yes.
meaning like I'm working with myself and how I operate rather than trying to work against it and fit it into something that's not working. And so, like, that
Absolutely.
was a great example of like
Thank
you
you.
went and you found what was going to work for you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Tell us a little bit about the Restful app. So now you've taken your process and this beautiful music that you've created and you've turned it into this app that seems like it's really connecting with people and being able to like find a place of calm and peace. And so like what inspired you specifically to create the app and like how does it support the neurodivergent community?
Yeah, for sure. So I had been writing music and I had been releasing albums just as digital downloads and for a really long time. And it was really wonderful and I loved it, but I found that a common problem that my customers and my fans had were just technical difficulties around, you know, how do I get this, you know, track or these albums that I've downloaded onto my computer? How do I get it onto my phone? I don't want to sit at my computer and listen, which is fair enough because
Yeah.
the whole point of Meditones is that you need headphones to experience the Meditones effect. And so, you know, people want to sit down or lie down and relax. I was often helping people like problem solve and do a lot of technical support, which I was happy to do, but I was just like, this is a really common problem. Like, how do I solve this? And I just really I didn't know. And it wasn't until my partner, my life partner, Harley, who is a web developer, said to me, have you ever thought about doing an app? And I was just like, oh my goodness, like, oh wow, I would love to make an app. I have no idea how I would even go about doing that. And he said, I can make one for you.
Awesome.
And I was like, sure, that sounds great. And so it was a little bit of a process of trial and error. And we spent a couple of years like developing a couple of different prototypes and different things until we eventually settled on Restful. And what I love about Restful is that I wanted people to be able to access all of the music because I've written so much music over the last few decades. And I just really wanted people to be able to like have an experience where they can open the app and be like, okay, I, you know, have a specific feeling or a mood that I want to create, or this is a specific time of day, or, you know, I need some help falling asleep, or I want some help waking up and focusing. To be able to have access to all of that and curate their own experience was really important to me. And for a long time, I couldn't ever, I know this sounds really like businessy, but I felt like I could never quite nail my market. I didn't know. I'm like, there's this thing that kind of binds us together and I don't know what it is. I'm like, yes, people are highly sensitive, or, you know, they have maybe some mental health challenges. And I tried calling people like peace seekers. And or like at one point I was like, are they empaths? I don't even know. I wouldn't, obviously would never use that word now. But I just was struggling to like find, I knew that there was like this thread that held us together as a community, but I wasn't really sure what it was until I found the word neurodivergent, and I was like, this is it. This is it. People are neurodivergent. Like, yes, maybe they are autistic. Maybe they're ADHD. Maybe they're synesthetic. Maybe they have CPTSD. Maybe they have migraine. Maybe they have insomnia. Like, there's all of these different things, but this umbrella term kind of captures everybody. And I think that's when I finally went, Restful is an app for neurodivergent people. Hey.
And it sounds like it was real tied to your own self-discovery too.
Yes.
You know, this path that was really enlightening for yourself, but then also like, here's what I've been trying to create for.
Yes.
It's connecting so many dots.
Oh, exactly. And my partner Harley identifies as neurodivergent too. And so when I said to him, I think this is what Restful is, and he's like, yeah, it absolutely is. And I said, I don't want to exclude anybody. Anybody can use Restful. That's fine. But I said, I feel like Restful can help neurodivergent people the most. And I really want to like talk more about my own journey and connect with more neurodivergent people. And he was like, go for it.
I love that support.
Yeah.
So great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So metatones and like what the core of like the music that you've composed has what you called the binaural beats. And I've heard of this before too. So it's like that sense, maybe you probably be able to describe it better than I can, but there's like this, actually I'll just let you describe.
Can you please try? Because
if you're only listening.
I love hearing other people explain binaural beats, because I love hearing. Yeah. I would love to hear what you think they are.
Okay, so obviously bi meaning two or dual beats happening, and so like and then when I've listened to it before, and it's sort of this. It's almost this like sound that kind of goes back and forth on each side, you know, each ear, which is like maybe tapping into different sides of your brain or something. You'll have to tell if I'm right. Yeah. And maybe perhaps sometimes they're using different frequencies, because I've also kind of gotten into like that sense of like a frequency that maybe supports something inside yourself. And so that's as far as I've got.
No, I love that. I love it. That's exactly what they are. I mean, bi, yes, exactly. Like bi meaning two, and aural as in ears and sound. And the tricky part is the beats. I think that really trips people up, because typically when you think of beats, you think of a rhythm or a drum beat.
Right.
But in the sense that the binaural beats are like a beating vibration. And so essentially what they are two slightly different frequencies of sound. And when they combine together, they create this kind of humming vibration. And then essentially the frequency of the vibration, so if the vibration was humming at 5 hertz, for example, which is hertz is what sound is measured in, the brain responds to that frequency by matching with the same brain waves. So for example, brain waves are measured in hertz, and so are sound waves. So sound waves that are in the region of 5 hertz would be in the region of theta brain waves, and theta brain waves are naturally dominant during REM sleep or deep meditation. And so you're absolutely right. You can use binaural beats to kind of tap into those like different brainwave states depending on what you want, whether you want to feel like a little bit more alert and calm and focused, or whether you want to help fall asleep into like a really deep dreamless sleep. That's how binaural beats can do it. And when I learned that, it just blew my mind. I was so skeptical when I first heard about this. I was just like, this sounds like some woo-woo nonsense. I don't know about this. But then I experienced it, and I was like, what is this sorcery that you can put on a pair of headphones? You can listen to this weird hum, and then your brain just like goes into like this state of relaxation. It is so bizarre. And so I think that's when it really hooked me. I was like, oh, you can you can just put on a pair of headphones and relax, and I don't need to like think about it or practice it or make any effort, which I found particularly good during times of like, you know, if I was having a panic attack or if I was feeling really overstimulated, I didn't have the capacity to like, you know, practice mindfulness or, you know, I
Right.
just needed, I needed help. And so I think that journey for me, you're absolutely right, was in parallel with the journey of the business of going, oh my goodness, this is so helpful for me. I know that this can help other people. And I feel really honored and grateful that this pathway was given to me.
I feel like it makes so much sense that that kind of stimuli, you know, it's like gentle enough where it's not overwhelming, but it's stimulating enough that maybe for those who kind of like require that, like it can really sort of calm the nervous system because it's providing stimuli. So I know for some of us
Exactly.
that is really helpful. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think for the ADHD part of my brain, I actually really struggle with rest. I find rest
Yeah.
really boring. And so I do think it's kind of ironic that I was led to this path of, you know, having a business called Restful and helping neurodivergent people find rest because, you know, I personally really struggle with it. And so having something that I can put on that is both stimulating and soothing at the same time, super helpful.
Yeah, exactly that. Well, then actually, I feel like you'd be the perfect person then. Like somebody who knows the struggle, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
versus someone who's just like, you know, this is super easy for me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, along with the Restful app, I know that you have like a blog on the website and you're sharing a lot of different things about neurodiversity. Could you share maybe one or two insights from your writing that you wish more people understood about neurodiversity?
Oh, for sure. I think the kind of like the thing that really helped click for me around neurodiversity is this idea that neurodivergence really is a social and political identity. It's not a medical diagnosis. It doesn't mean autism and or ADHD, which, you know, I think a lot of people kind of commonly
Right.
use it as, and I understand why, but understanding it as an umbrella term that really just means anybody that has a brain or nervous system that processes information differently to how we expect them to. And so because we expect people to read, write, be good at math, we don't expect them to have sensory sensitivities, or we don't expect them to have seizures or migraine attacks. We don't expect people to hear color. Like all of
Yeah.
these, you know, all of these different ways that our brain and nervous system processes information is different to what we expect people to do. And in our current medical pathology paradigm, we say that those things are bad. We say they're broken, they're deficient, they shouldn't be there. And while I think, yeah, some of those things can be painful, can be frustrating, can be really challenging to live with and deal with, I reject the notion that my brain is broken or bad just because it's different. And I think that is the core of the neurodiversity movement, is really kind of like depathologizing, destigmatizing those conditions to say, I am not a broken person. My brain isn't defective. It's just different. I have strengths and challenges just like every other person in the world. I may need more accommodations or support or care or treatment, and that's okay.
And that's okay. I
And
love
that's
that.
okay.
And I really, really do resonate with that in that sense of like understanding that a difference doesn't mean that it's bad or wrong, right?
Mm,
It might be very well challenging and it's important to acknowledge that.
mm.
And that doesn't make it wrong. And I
Yes.
think that it's hard because like you're mentioning, the pathologizing nature of the way that our society views neurodivergence can really give that message, you know? Like I know at least in the process of like a diagnosis, what they're usually looking for is like, here's all the things we've decided are like, are you not fitting in? And the language that is used can create some shame sometimes, I feel.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And I think That is what's so powerful about the neurodiversity movement and embracing the term neurodivergence is this idea that, yeah, your differences are just different and they're morally neutral, right? They really are not bad or wrong just because they are different to what people expect. I like to use the metaphor of like a different universe. And so if we lived in a different universe where people were expected to be good at singing and dancing and painting, and you weren't good at those things, you would be considered disordered. And somebody like me would be considered neurotypical. Those things are very easy for me. I don't have to think very hard about them. It comes pretty naturally to me. And yet, there isn't any such thing as tuneful music disorder. That's not a thing that exists in the DSM, right? Like there aren't really disorders around being bad at art or being a terrible dancer with no rhythm. Like those things don't exist because we don't expect people to be, proficient at those things. And so when I think about what it might be like to live in a universe where the expectations were flipped or different, that helps me to remember that, like, if I am struggling with feeling, like I have something wrong with me, I just have to remember it's only because the way that my body and brain is, it just doesn't meet the standard of today's society. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me. It means we need to expand our ideas of what is acceptable in society.
And that's one of the things I say at the beginning of the podcast is like rebel minds changing the world. And this is why I think it's so important to speak with other neurodivergent folks who are creating these things in the world, because you are part of that change, right? Like you are helping to create a world that is more accessible and is neuroaffirming to those of us who have these differences.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, I know too, like your work bridges music and neuroscience, and you're passionate about these things. Like what fascinates you most about the relationship between like the sound and the brain?
Oh gosh, I mean, so many things. I think, oh God, I don't even know where to start. It's so bizarre to me that that variations in air pressure can cause us to hear things, and then they cause a sensation in our body and and I think to me that's why I'm so passionate about music. Music really is just vibration through the air that reaches your ears, and yet it can give me goosebumps. It can make me cry. I can jump around for joy with 10,000 other people at a concert. Like it's so it is so bizarre to me how powerful music is, how different music is across the world too. The different musical theories that have been developed that are like so complex and rich, beyond Western classical musical theory. I'm so fascinated by the different instruments that people have created to make different sounds. In India, there are certain melodies, ragas or different rhythms that are only to be played at certain times of the day or certain times of the year. It just like music is it's so sacred, but it's also so human in a way. And I find that so fascinating that just sound can impact the brain in a way that has this impact on our body and our emotions and on our relationships and on people and culture. It's really so extraordinary.
I have definitely experienced that, but I hadn't ever sort of made it conscious, like how fascinating that really is. Because it is. Like, as you're describing it, I'm like, that is fascinating. If I think about it, because I can picture myself, sitting next to a brook or some running water, and just the sound of that coming into my ears, the way it can calm my whole nervous system. Yeah. Or, maybe like you're driving and someone honks and it's like, ah,
Yes.
Yes. like these like
Exactly.
different types of sounds and textures, and it really can. I remember the first time I went to the symphony, like I also felt that sense of like being brought to tears almost. I was
Mm,
just the beauty of the way that these things were composed together, and the
mm.
instruments playing, and I don't know, just like moving in space and time and the air in a sense
Yes. Yeah.
was just so moving.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it and learn about it. It's really fascinating. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I would also love to hear a little bit about your approach as an entrepreneur, a creative, and how you are making it neuroaffirming for yourself. If you had some ways in which you're
Yeah.
doing that.
Oh gosh, I think the biggest shift for me was giving myself permission to be neurodivergent. That was the
That's huge.
really, yeah, that was the biggest shift because I think prior to that, I wasn't able to find a sustainable rhythm for myself. And I was very hard on myself when I couldn't be consistent, or, if I spent a day in hyperfocus in the studio and then the next day I was just wiped out, or my cyclical interests and I'd get really interested in something and then I'd kind of get bored of it and I didn't understand why, or, there were just so many things that traditional business advice or self help advice, and I've tried it all, just really, I couldn't make it stick. And so for me, I was like, okay, I am neurodivergent. I also have a chronic illness, which I have chronic migraine, which falls under neurodivergence. All of these things impact my brain and body in a way that I need to find out what works for me. And so giving myself permission to rest when I need, remembering that if I let go of an interest, it will probably come back at some point. Like letting myself focus on what is interesting rather than what is important. And obviously, like, I can do that as an entrepreneur, thankfully. And so I can sit down and I can look at, the different projects or the different tasks I have for the day or the week or the month and think, oh, wow, what is really interesting me right now? Because I know that I can just bang out a blog post in a few hours if I am really interested in doing it. But if I am not, and I force myself to sit there and try and focus and like muscle through it, I feel bad. The work doesn't get done. The work doesn't get done very well. So why am I punishing myself and trying to fit
Mm.
myself into a mold that doesn't work? And so those things, just finding what works for me, was really, really important. And I think you touched on that earlier about, like, even within the neurodivergent space, there is advice that might work for someone and not for somebody else. And also with ADHD, sometimes the things that work one day don't work the next day.
And that can be a difficult thing, because like there's a part of us that has just been told so much that there has to be consistency.
Yes.
And so even when we're beginning to allow ourselves to diverge from our own expectations of ourselves, that was previously sort of given to us,
Yeah.
we still kind of have this in the back of our mind, like, well, you got to find consistency with that. Then you're like,
Mm-hmm.
actually, you might not, and
Yeah.
maybe that's the consistent part.
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. And I think, yeah, just leaning into that like inconsistency, flexibility, and giving
Mm,
myself permission to be like, okay, well, what's going to help me today? What what do I need today? Do I really need to just rest? Do I need to find something that's really interesting? Do I need to switch things up? Do I need to go move my body? Do I need a body double? Like, I mean, there's just so many different things,
yeah.
and thankfully, I do have the liberty to be able to, approach my day today with that freedom, which I am, exceptionally grateful for. But I really think, as much as possible, if people can give themselves permission to truly accept and love their own neurodivergence, even if that love is a sense of neutrality, right? Like, my neurodivergence is not a superpower, it just is. So, what do I need to
Mm.
do to help myself today with what I need, and give myself permission to have that need met?
You said
Um,
so many really powerful things,
oh,
and
thank you.
uh, and I like it's like especially that sense around the giving yourself permission, because the way that, as you were describing earlier, like society is not built to really affirm neurodivergent folks. And so no one is going to be giving you permission to do this a different way. You have to be the one that does. I mean, if I can on this podcast say you have permission and that matters to you, awesome. But
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think that in our real lived experience, like our environment around us is not affirming how we need to do things. And so it takes, I think, a level of like courage to be able to give ourselves that permission. And it's not a one-time thing either. And maybe you've had this experience as well too, where I'm still learning to give myself even more and more like levels and layers of permission to be neuroaffirming in the way that I do this. I mean,
Yes.
even this podcast, I mean, technically I think it says somewhere on the podcast that if this is a weekly show, it is not a weekly show.
Yeah.
It's weekly sometimes, and then it's not, and then it'll be weekly. In that
Yeah.
same cyclical nature that you were
Yeah.
kind of describing, like that can be like one of the big things that can be hard to give ourselves permission to do and to relax into and to be, because that's not the way that our sort of like capitalistic societies work. Like
Yep.
there's no room for a cyclical nervous system or nature. And so I really appreciate like you inviting folks into that. And I think too, that invitation starts with each of us personally. Like as people see other people doing it, I feel like that really helps. And there's something about it that, as we begin to give ourselves permission, it does something within our nervous system that does relax us. And I feel like as we go into the world, that is felt. However you want to see that, however woo-woo you want to get, because I do like to do that sometimes. It's like I think it changes something, and I think it's so important, even on just your own personal level. And yeah, and just kind of knowing it's a process. And then I feel like there was other things you said. I'm trying to be like, I come back to it, but
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, it is something that you have to practice, because every single day we are just bombarded with these messages that, like, you're wrong. The way you do things are wrong. The way you think about things are wrong. The way your body is wrong. The way your brain works is wrong. And so, yeah, it really is that just like practice of being, coming back to yourself and coming back to that, creating safety in your own body. And I do think that has an impact on the world, because, a safe and secure nervous system is very regulating for other people too. And so the more that we can practice that embodiment and that felt sense of safety of like, I am me, and it's okay to be me, and really like owning that. And yeah, it is a practice, but I do think, the more that we can practice it ourselves and then project that out into the world, the more we give other people permission to be themselves. And yeah, that can only be a very healing thing.
Yeah, I really believe that. And I know too, you were mentioning about like being grateful for the freedom that you have to do that, maybe more than you ever have in the past. And I also want to say too that we can find ourselves in times where we just have to kind of like do things to survive.
Yes.
I've definitely had that experience very often.
Yeah.
And so this can also be an invitation of taking this at the level that you can access it right now.
Absolutely.
Right? Because it can even just be like within your own self, in your mind, you're saying it's okay that this is challenging for me. If you're having to fit yourself into a scenario that isn't very affirming of you, or even just like find those times outside of that circumstance to like give yourself those moments of rest, or when you're taking rest, to like let it be okay that you're taking rest.
Yes. Yes, I love that. I think that is such an important thing, because yes, of course, it's very easy for me to say, I can do these things now because I have the freedom to be an entrepreneur, to like set my own schedule and, create my own environment and have a low demand lifestyle. Like, of course, it's really easy for me. But yeah, it hasn't always been like this. And I do think it is really important to affirm yourself as much as possible in those moments that you can. And I think the more you give yourself permission, the more I think you're kind of able to just like curate your environment just like that little bit more. Like, where are the moments that I can affirm myself? What space can I create? Even if it's just like a small little room, or even a portion of my room that can help me, soothe some sensory challenges, or, what tools do I need to take with me when I go out into the world, instead of white knuckling through it and then feeling overstimulated and overwhelmed and resentful. It's like, what is within my locus of control and care, and who else can I ask for help? Who else can I trust to help me within this process? Because I am a true believer in both self-care and community care. I think
Yes.
a really big part of self-care is also that you don't have to do it all by yourself. It is about, creating those networks of people that can also help you with what you need in those moments. Mm.
Oh, I love that. Yes, absolutely, to community care.
Yeah.
And I wanted to validate, like, if your community is an online community, that is just as valid and important.
Oh,
And
yeah.
connect with us and all my
Yes.
guests online.
Yes.
We are here. We say things. Like, if you want to connect on threads, that's always a great place where people
Yeah.
seem to be like chatting more.
Absolutely.
So I really encourage that too, as a possibility.
Mm.
If someone finds themselves maybe more isolated,
Mm.
that there's lots of different ways, like whatever is accessible to you. I always try to take that stance, like whatever is accessible to you.
I love that.
It's
Yes.
whatever that next step is. That's so, so valuable and important.
Mm. Mm.
There was one other thing that I have since lost from my brain.
Oh, that's okay. Do you want to take some time to try and catch it?
Yeah, like, I don't know.
That's okay.
That's okay. Yeah.
If you think of it, feel free to like jump in later and say, "Oh yeah, the thing that I wanted to say."
Right. Sometimes that's how it happens, right? It's like floats around and
Yeah,
it like comes back in.
exactly.
Um, I feel like we've touched on this a little bit, but maybe like if there's anything else around, for any advice you'd have on embracing, like finding your own unique rhythm. Like, I guess, like you kind of said, it was a process,
Mm.
and that you let it sort of shift day to day. Is that kind of how you've come to it now?
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, I have a lot of rage around like the way society is. And so I for a long time I kind of moved through the world with this, like, really grinding sense of resentment. I feel like I do still have that as an activist, because I'm like, we really could have a much better society, everybody. Like, come on.
Seems
um,
obvious.
yeah, right.
And yes.
And so now these days, I feel like when I have a sense of like personal affront, I try to remember that, like, I can't control other people's behavior. I need to try as best I can to keep myself well regulated. And so, like, what do I need to do that? And so for me, it's really often really simple things, like I take loop earplugs with me everywhere I go. They just live in my purse. And if I am,
That's what it was. Okay. Yes.
yeah, if what was the thing that you were going to ask about?
No, but I also had a comment about the loopy.
Yeah,
So helpful.
so helpful. I just, like, if I'm going somewhere and a place is really noisy, instead of feeling mad that everybody is noisy and why do we live in such a noisy world and why don't people build structures that are quieter and absorb sound, and like all of these different things, like I just put them in. And like, again, as an activist, I know that that isn't enough. I know that it is important to keep advocating to build environments that are accessible, because accessible design, it helps everyone. It's not why we should do it. We should do it regardless. We should make public life accessible for disabled people. However, it also helps everyone. And so I do think about that still, and I put in my earplugs when I need to, so that I can protect my own nervous system from overwhelming and overstimulating sound. If I am having a migraine attack, I will give myself permission to put on my noise cancelling headphones when I need to maybe unpack the dishwasher, because the sound of
Yeah.
crockery is so painful. And so instead of being in more pain, I just put them on, and I do it. If I'm having a particularly bad attack, I'm very thankful that my partner Harley is able to do those things for me, and I let him do those things. And so we share that kind of care with each other. Um, and so, and letting go of the notion that in those moments that I am somehow a burden to him, because he is not a burden to me if he is sick and I care for him. And that I think is also really, really important. We are told constantly that people are a pain and a burden and annoying to have to take care of, and that's a lie. It's a lie.
It is a lie. Yes. I love how you describe the sort of dance between like showing up for advocacy and then that self-compassion of, and my nervous system needs to be supported for the sort of long range view of change. Like
Yes.
change takes lifetimes and lifetimes, and it's going to take my whole lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like how
Yes.
to do that. And I love that you brought up something so simple, which was funny because that was the thing I was thinking of. As a similar example was that sense of like that little accessible piece of getting earplugs, you
Mm.
know, and just wearing them. And I actually had this realization where I used to think I had a lot of social anxiety because my nervous system would be activated when there's like all the sound going on and
Yes.
stuff. And like later on, years later, after I realized, you know, it's not really social anxiety, it's like autism and these other things.
Yes.
And like, but I went to this conference thing and I put the earplugs in because people were coming in and like the sound was getting higher and higher. And I started feeling that activation.
Yep.
And I put the earplugs in and it was like, and I'm like, this whole time thinking
The
it's
whole
people,
time.
it's really like it's being overstimulated, and I didn't realize that's what was happening,
Yep.
you know. And I just love that so much because it was a way in which I was giving myself access. Like I
Yeah.
was allowing myself to stay there and to be there
Yes.
and to hear the things from the speakers that I really wanted to hear.
Yes.
And I just needed to be the one standing in the back with my earplugs in. And I know too, you mentioned that sense of taking off of that self-judgment. And one of the things, because like, you know, like you can see them, they stick out a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
There might be ones that hide more, but like I've
Who
had that
cares?
moment of, um, right. And like, who cares? Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had that moment of just being like, you know what? I need this. I don't care if it looks strange. I'm like clearly like having something in my ears because I need this. And it was one of those moments of internally, again, from the beginning of our conversation, giving myself permission
Yeah.
to be different
Yeah.
and to have my need and to address my need and to let it be okay.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I feel like, your podcast is about being rebellious. And I
Yeah.
really feel like that sense of like, who cares what other people think? This is important for me is a
Yeah.
rebellious stance, right?
Mm.
Of being nonconformist, of saying, you know what, I don't care if people think I look weird that I'm standing at the back with earplugs in. I don't care that I'm
Yeah.
walking around the shops with a pair of noise cancelling headphones on. I don't care that I'm like sitting on the train with a fidget toy. Like, who cares what other people think? This is
Right.
important for me.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I think that stance can really push back on other people's judgment, I think too. Like the more I am able to just go, so what? Like people say to me, "Oh, you're so sensitive." So,
Yeah.
what are they
You're
going
like,
to
yeah.
say? Like, I really feel like it's very difficult to argue with indifference. And so if
Mm.
people try to judge me for being neurodivergent, and my response is, so what?
Yeah.
They like, how are they? All right, like if you judge me, I don't care. That's fine. You can think whatever you like. I'm still going to sit here with my earplugs in.
Yeah. You know, and I really think, at least for me, that level of being able to like receive other people's judgments, like, and let it just be like, who cares,
Mm,
came from the fact that I stopped judging myself. And that was at
exactly.
least a big part of it. I'm not saying it's the entirety of it, but it was a big part of it. That when I no longer was like making it wrong, that I needed things or that I was different in a certain way, then it didn't really matter if someone like pointed it out or
Yeah.
or they think it's wrong. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, exactly. One of my mantras that I've had for a really long time is no one can judge me for something I accept about myself.
Mm,
And I
yeah.
try to remember that when I start feeling weird or different or wrong. It's like, if I accept this about myself, other people's judgments just don't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I also want to, I know we have just a few more minutes, but
Yeah.
like, tell me a little bit about like what's next with the Restful app, any upcoming projects or features with that, or how would you like to invite people into that?
Oh, for sure. So, the things that we're really excited about at the moment is we're going through a process of localizing the app and translating it into different languages other than English. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's a pretty big task, but it's just another way that I feel like we'll be able to reach more people, make it so much more accessible. And so we're really excited about that. And
Awesome.
yeah, if anybody is curious, you can find the Restful app on both the App Store and Google Play. It's free to download, and there are monthly and annual subscriptions available. However, there are also a bunch of free tracks that you can just listen to for free forever if you like. We just wanted
Oh,
to make it
I love
really
that.
accessible. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for the work that you are doing in the world and what you're
Thank
creating, and that
you.
you're using your talents or your gifts and your like your what do you call it when you're fascinated about something? Your interest to like really offer this. I so appreciate that, and I appreciate
Thank
too
you.
like especially with your advocacy. Like I see you online, and I see you out there like doing this in a really powerful way.
Oh, thank
Um,
you. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah. And oh, speaking of out there in the world, how can people find you? I will put links in the bottom as well, but I always like people just to like say,
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, our website is restfulapp.co, and all of the links are there. The links are there to download the app if you want. And we've also got a blog. I'm also on Threads as restful.music.
yes,
Yeah, so hopefully we will connect somewhere online.
wonderful. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for being here. And I so appreciate your time,
Oh, thank
especially
you
with the
for
big time
hearing.
difference. I know you're in Australia.
Yeah, it's sometimes tricky being like so far across the pond. It's like someone has to either get up really early or stay up late. So I also really appreciate you making space for me too. Thank you.